Blood was seeping through the gauze, but she didn't make a sound of pain. Inside the sweltering base in the middle of a war zone, Sarah Martinez sat still in the medical supply room, stitching up a deep tear in her own shoulder. Not a groan, not a call for help. To everyone else, she was just a regular combat nurse, a forgettable rookie lost in the crowd, yet her hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times under live fire. The helicopter blades slashed the sweltering sky, floodlights sweeping over a dirt-stained airstrip. The U.S. Field Hospital crouched in the middle of the war zone, a makeshift fortress of concrete and steel, tense as if combat could crash through its gates at any moment. In that chaos, one figure seemed to drift by like a shadow: Sarah Martinez. At 24, she looked more like a timid recruit than a medical professional. Hair tied neatly back, oversized uniform hiding her small frame, eyes cast down whenever someone looked her way. Even her footsteps seemed like an apology for disturbing the ground. In the beginning, nobody paid her much attention. In this military hospital, the clamor of wounds, the screams of the injured, and the relentless pace of surgeries swept everything away. A quiet, unremarkable girl was nothing unusual. But it was Sarah's silence that made her stand out to those who noticed details. Janet Williams, the head nurse with 15 years of experience, had seen every kind of rookie. The eager ones desperate to prove themselves, the timid who slowly toughened up, the ambitious climbers chasing promotion. Sarah fit none of them. She wasn't proactive, but neither was she flustered. She worked as if every motion had been pre-programmed, precise, exact, without a sigh. Sarah arrived earliest, left latest. Her reports were flawless, minor injuries handled with speed, surgical tools arranged so neatly that even veteran nurses nodded in approval. But when it came to break time, when everyone else chattered to vent, the pressure, Sarah stayed quiet. Others spoke of family, traded jokes, complained about the searing heat. She only gave a faint smile or a nod, then slipped back into silence. Sergeant Mike Thompson, a seasoned SEAL, had seen plenty of medics. He could read body language, slot people into categories, the jokers, the serious ones, the ambitious. But Sarah fit no mold. Her silence wasn't insecurity, it was a shield, built to keep everyone at arm's length. One afternoon in the supply depot, Thompson caught Sarah stacking gauze. Her movements were quick, exact, like someone who'd done the job their whole life. He asked casually, "Where'd you train?" Sarah's hands froze for a second, then she answered flatly, "Fort Sam Houston." Then advanced medical training. No personal detail, no scrap of ordinary memory. When Thompson pressed, "What brought you here?" Sarah just shrugged. Seemed like a good experience. The words sank into emptiness, like a stone disappearing into deep water. Thompson realized that whenever a personal question arose, Sarah instantly withdrew, cutting it off with silence. Yet sometimes, the shell cracked. Once, a 19-year-old soldier sat crying in the waiting room, trembling as he admitted he had frozen in combat. Sarah walked over and said softly, "Fear is normal. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward while you're still shaking." Her eyes, then deep, steady, reminded the boy of old combat veterans. For a moment, Sarah wasn't a timid recruit, but a soul that had seen far too much war. Then she shut down again, as if she had never spoken. Her quarters reflected the same emptiness. No family photos, no keepsakes, only the bare essentials issued to everyone. In a base where soldiers pinned up pictures of children, hung small flags, or kept letters to remind themselves they still belonged to the outside world, Sarah's room was a hollow cocoon. People began to whisper. Some said she was just an introvert, others guessed trauma. Thompson kept his doubts to himself. His instincts, the same ones that had saved his life on the battlefield, told him Martinez wasn't ordinary. Sarah knew those looks. She could feel them trying to pierce the shell she had built, but she also knew how to hide. Hiding meant safety. No questions. No digging. No one discovering that her real wounds weren't on her skin but buried far deeper. At night, when the base finally fell into rare silence, Sarah returned to the medical storeroom. She liked working alone, checking supplies, lining up each roll of bandage, each vial of medicine. In that monotonous rhythm, she found a false peace. Each step counted, each form filled, was a kind of warding charm she didn't have to remember, didn't have to face what she had lost. But war doesn't let anyone hide forever. It finds your weakness, forces you to stand, strips away the mask. And for Sarah, that moment was now measured in days. Because an explosion was waiting, and with it, the secret she had gripped so tightly it suffocated her, was about to crack wide open. The alarm shattered the quiet night. The clock struck exactly 3 a.m., when most of the base lay deep in brief, exhausted sleep. Sarah was in the supply room, her hands quietly jotting down numbers on an inventory sheet. The flicker of fluorescent lights overhead was a familiar sound of safety. Then the ground shook. The violent tremor sent steel shelves swaying, boxes of medicine and gauze crashing down like rain. The lights went out, leaving only the strobe of emergency red. Sarah slammed against the wall, gasping, her heartbeat pounding like it would tear through her chest. Outside, a second explosion roared, followed by screams and the thunder of boots racing down the hall. Mass casualties. All medical personnel to the trauma unit, now. The voice echoed through the loudspeakers. Sarah forced herself upright, drew a deep breath. Her body trembled, but her hands were unnervingly steady. She locked the supply room and ran with the flood of people surging toward the trauma ward. Stepping inside was like plunging into a nightmare. 3 Black Hawks cycled in, unloading bodies drenched in blood. American soldiers, local civilians, even a small child all arriving at once. The air was thick with antiseptic, heavy with the iron tang of blood. Moans, screams, the clatter of stretchers and instruments fused into a symphony of chaos. Dr. Rodriguez commanded, his voice booming, "Triage immediately. Anyone needing surgery goes to OR 1, 2, and 3. Minor wounds, hold for treatment." Thompson bent over a Marine with a mangled leg, his battle-hardened hands clamping the bleeding. Williams wrangled a group of young nurses over civilians torn by shrapnel. In the frenzy, Rodriguez pointed to an unconscious girl, maybe 8 years old, her skin pale and lips blue. "Martinez. Prep trauma room 3. Internal bleeding needs emergency surgery." Sarah nodded and sprinted. Each movement was swift, exact. She laid out instruments, powered up monitors, readied anesthesia. Her fluid precision made the other nurses pause, startled by such mastery from someone they'd all thought of as the new girl. A sudden shout cut through the din. On the next bed, a civilian hit by chest shrapnel collapsed, his heartbeat flatlined. The young doctor working on him started CPR, sweat pouring down his face. "He's not responding. I need advanced resuscitation now." Eyes darted frantically. Rodriguez was scrubbed in. Thompson was tied up. The other doctors were either overwhelmed or too inexperienced with cardiac trauma. The room sagged under the weight of despair. Sarah stood frozen for a beat, her eyes flickered, as if fighting herself. Then she stepped forward, voice calm, clipped, carrying the force of command. "I'll take over." The room fell silent. Without waiting for objection, Sarah knelt by the patient, her hands moving with astonishing precision. She ordered, "Epinephrine, atropine, advanced airway kit now." The nurses hesitated, then scrambled to comply. Sarah assessed quickly. Ordinary CPR was failing. The shrapnel was blocking function. Her hands blurred through each step, securing the airway, intubating, charging the defibrillator. Not a tremor, not a moment's doubt, so unlike the timid girl they knew. 10 minutes dragged like an eternity. Then the heart monitor flickered beep. Then another. A steady rhythm returned. Color crept back into the man's face. Sarah exhaled, sweat dripping from her brow, but her voice stayed firm. Stabilized for now. Get him to surgery. The room held its breath. Everyone had just witnessed something unthinkable. The quiet nurse had performed procedures reserved for elite combat surgeons. Rodriguez stepped out of the OR, stunned by the scene. Across the ward, Thompson froze mid-bandage, staring. He knew those techniques, he had seen them before, but only in the hands of the most highly trained SEAL medics. Sarah bowed her head, stepped back, letting the doctors take over. She turned away, back to cleaning up as if nothing had happened. But the air had shifted. Every eye in the ward stayed fixed on her. And from that moment, Sarah's silence was no longer just a trait. It was a mystery. A question hanging heavy over the base. News of the chaotic night spread faster than any desert wind. Within hours, every corner of the base buzzed with the same story. Nurse Martinez, the quiet girl, no one noticed, had done something that made even veteran doctors stop in their tracks. In the break room, voices overlapped. Did you see? She intubated like she'd done it 1,000 times. Not just that. Her speed. I've never seen anyone move with such precision. Strange. How could a rookie possibly have skills like that? Sarah heard the whispers every time she passed by. She forced herself to look calm, eyes down, steps steady, as if she hadn't heard a thing. But inside, her heart pounded, each beat striking against the memories she wanted buried. Janet Williams, usually patient with rookies, couldn't hide her doubts. At the morning briefing, she gave Rodriguez a questioning look. He answered only with a heavy nod. We'll need to talk to Martinez soon. But the first to act was Thompson. He began watching Sarah in the days that followed, discreet but persistent. Every small movement, he logged like a puzzle piece. Sarah never sat with her back to a door. Walking into a room, she scanned every exit. Working with patience, she seemed to anticipate what was needed. Gauze, tubing, meds, before any doctor gave the order. That wasn't luck or a rookie's intuition. It was survival habit. The habit of someone who had lived in situations where the smallest mistake meant death. One evening, Thompson spotted Sarah in the medical storeroom. The dim neon light threw her shadow across the wall. She was dressing a long cut on her arm, clearly older, but only now being tended. Her hands were practiced, each stitch so precise it reminded Thompson of combat surgeons he'd met in the SEALs. He stepped in, keeping his voice casual. You should let someone else look at that wound. Not easy to handle alone. Sarah glanced up briefly, then bent back over her work. Just a scratch. I can handle it. Right. Handle it like someone who's done it 100 times. Thompson moved closer, eyes on her steady stitches. Martinez? You're not like any nurse I've ever met. Sarah didn't reply. The needle in her hand moved in perfect rhythm, silence her only answer. The next day in the mess hall, a group of young doctors huddled together, whispering as Sarah walked in. Their voices fell quiet, eyes following her. A few forced awkward smiles, but most just stared as if at a riddle unsolved. Sarah took her tray, found the farthest empty corner, and sat alone. Thompson, at a nearby table, watched in silence. He didn't like the gossip. In the SEALs, secrecy was part of the job, but it also meant responsibility. If Sarah carried something beyond her official file, he needed to know. Not out of curiosity, but because lives were at stake. That night, he opened a secure channel, sending a few messages to old Navy contacts. He didn't ask directly about Sarah, just wrote briefly, a nurse, but performed advanced cardiac resuscitation in the field. Looks like special operations training. Ever heard of something like that? The reply came back hours later. Sounds like SEAL or Delta combat medic training. But the name Martinez? Not on any list. Thompson frowned. No record meant only two possibilities. One, Sarah had never been in special ops, just somehow picked up the skills almost impossible. Two, she had been part of a program the military wanted hidden. Meanwhile, Sarah felt the circle of suspicion tightening. Every stare, every hollow congratulations was like a blade turning. She tried to retreat into old routines. Early in, late out, quiet work. But what happened? The night of the explosion couldn't be erased. One afternoon, while changing a young soldier's bandages, Sarah let slip a phrase, "Stay frosty," a saying used mostly by those with special operations training. The soldier didn't notice, but Thompson across the room heard it clearly. His gaze locked on her, longer than usual. Sarah realized instantly. For a moment, the air thickened. Then she turned away, resuming her task, pretending she'd said nothing. But Thompson knew. More certain than ever, Sarah Martinez was not just a nurse. The base slid into hotter, tenser days. Patrols were ambushed more often, casualties climbed. Every night the helicopters brought back the wounded. And every night, Sarah was there quiet, exact, machine-like. But beneath the calm, she could feel it. The wall she had built was cracking, piece by piece. All her efforts to hide could collapse at any moment. And war, like sensing blood in the water, was readying a new strike to tear away her last mask. Nights in the desert were always thick and heavy. The day's blistering heat drained away, leaving behind a cold darkness as if the land itself were exhausted. The base lay unusually quiet, broken only by the hum of industrial fans and the glow of a few towering floodlights. Sarah was in the trauma room, organizing equipment, when the alarm wailed. A crackling voice over the radio echoed through the hallway. Supply convoy ambushed. Multiple casualties. Rapid response team to the site immediately. Area not secure, enemy fire possible. Thompson burst in, eyes sharp as steel. Martinez, you're with me. Bring the combat trauma kit. Sarah froze for a second. Memories rushed in: gunfire, screams, the stench of gunpowder mixed with blood. She forced the fear down and gave a small nod. The Black Hawk tore through the night, shuddering in the wind. The pilot's voice cut in. Hot LZ. Enemy still in the area. You've got 3 minutes before I have to pull out. As they landed, the team rushed from the cabin, crouched low, carrying stretchers and medical bags. The scene before them was hell itself. Trucks engulfed in flames, smoke rolling thick, firelight flickering across the sand. Bodies lay scattered among the wreckage, a few still moaning for help. Sporadic gunfire echoed from the distance. Thompson moved fast. Davis, handle the light wounds. Martinez, with me. This sergeant's bleeding out, we stabilize him now. Sarah dropped to her knees beside a young soldier, unconscious. The abdominal wound was so deep the blood poured without pause. Thompson pressed hard with gauze, jaw tight, but the flow wouldn't stop. We have to get him back to base immediately. He shook his head. But the bird won't be back for minutes. He'll be gone before then. Sarah stared at the wound, breath ragged. This was exactly the kind of case she'd handled before, survivable only through advanced field surgery, something no ordinary nurse was trained to do. Her hands trembled, sweat breaking across her skin. No. She couldn't. If she did this, everyone would know. If she failed, the past would repeat. Thompson leaned close, voice urgent but steady. Martinez, listen to me. I saw you in that hospital. I know you can do this. That soldier needs you right now. Sarah shut her eyes tight, her heart pounding like war drums. Gunfire cracked closer. Then she opened them, and in an instant the change came. Fear drained away, replaced by a sharp, unwavering gaze. Cover me. I need space. Her hands went to work. She opened the surgical kit, chose the scalpel, and commanded firmly. Clamp, drain. High-pressure fluids now. The soldiers around her froze for a moment, then scrambled to obey as Thompson backed her up. In the flickering firelight, Sarah moved with cold precision. She cut, found the bleeder, clamped it, stopping the flow with techniques rarely seen outside special operations medics. Bullets tore the air. A soldier shouted, "Enemy closing in!" But Sarah never looked up. Her hand stayed steady, every motion deliberate, as if programmed. For 15 relentless minutes she fought death head-on until the bleeding stopped, blood pressure stabilized, the heartbeat returned. The young soldier was pulled back from the edge. The SEAL team stood frozen, wide-eyed. They'd seen combat surgeons at work, but never a young nurse performed something this advanced, under fire, in the middle of an ambush. Thompson's chest tightened as he looked at Sarah. He knew that look, the look of someone who had done this before. Someone who had lived, fought, and saved lives in missions most soldiers would never even hear of. The chopper's engines roared. They loaded the wounded onto stretchers and evacuated the hot zone. As the Black Hawk lifted, the cabin fell into a strange silence, broken only by the thumping blades. Sarah sat back against the wall, sweat soaking her hairline. Her teammates' eyes locked on her, not with doubt anymore, but with awe, edged with respect. Yet inside, fear tightened its grip. She knew, from that moment on, no one would ever see her as just an ordinary nurse. The secret had cracked open, and once the fissure appeared, nothing could stop it from spreading. The base sank into silence after the night of chaos. The last helicopter had landed, the wounded carried into surgery, everyone collapsing into chairs in exhaustion, but the quiet among them wasn't the usual kind. It was heavy, tense, and it revolved around one person, Sarah Martinez. No one spoke it aloud, but their eyes did. Every gaze followed Sarah as she washed her hands, organized the instruments, tried to shrink back into her old shell. But this time, the disguise no longer worked. They had all seen what she did out there on the battlefield. No one could forget the sight of her cutting into flesh under fire, her hands steady as steel. Thompson watched in silence from afar. He didn't join the whispers, didn't press her in public, but his eyes carried a resolve. He needed to know the truth, not out of curiosity, but because the lives of the entire team could depend on it. A secret like that, if not understood, could be a weapon, or it could be a threat. That night, Sarah slipped into the base chapel, one of the rare places away from the noise of war, a small space of wooden pews and flickering candles. She sat alone in the back row, hands clenched tight, eyes empty. Footsteps echoed behind her. Thompson entered, no knock, no warning. He sat beside her, silent. For minutes, neither spoke, only the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. Finally, Sarah's voice came, soft as a confession. "You want to know, don't you? Why I can do the things I did." Thompson neither nodded nor denied. He only looked at her, patient, steady. Sarah drew a long breath, and as if breaking open a cocoon she had held too long, her voice cracked into the darkness. 3 years ago, I was a medic with a SEAL team, Afghanistan. The memories slammed back, sharp as shattered glass. She saw herself again in sweat-soaked uniform, running through shattered villages, gunfire echoing through valleys. Her team 8 men, hardened, relentless. They weren't just comrades, they were family. They laughed in the rare moments of peace, shared scraps of rations, called her Doc with absolute trust. Sarah was their lifeline. Trained far beyond standard, battlefield surgery, internal trauma care, every advanced skill. She had once pulled a man through a chest wound that should have killed him, stitched an artery in the dark by the beam of a dying flashlight. They believed that as long as Sarah was there, death would have to wait its turn. But then came that mission. Intelligence promised a high-value terrorist leader capture or kill. A routine. Op. Insert. Strike fast. Extract. They had done dozens like it. This one was a trap. Sarah's voice trembled, her eyes shut tight as though watching it all again. We entered the valley. Then the ridgeline lit up. Gunfire poured like rain, mines exploding underfoot. I ran from man to man, blood soaking my hands. I thought I was making it. I kept them alive, minute by minute. I believed we'd break through. Her breath hitched, her fists clenched until her palms bled. But we ran out of ammo. Comms were cut. The enemy closed in from every side. The captain called for an airstrike on our own position. No one gets taken alive, he said. I couldn't leave them. I stayed, fighting to the last second. And then, her voice broke, tears spilling as the words choked out. The bombs fell. My entire team died right in front of me. They found me 3 days later, buried in rubble. The only one alive. They pinned a medal on me, called me a hero. But the truth is, I failed. 8 men trusted me, and I wasn't good enough to save them. The chapel was swallowed in silence. Thompson sat there, not touching her, but his eyes were full of understanding. He knew that weight the torment when brothers in arms fell, when responsibility crushed like a mountain. But Sarah's wound cut even deeper. She carried a burden no one else could reach. You didn't fail, he said at last, his voice low and firm. You did the impossible. Without you, they might have died far sooner. Sarah shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. No. If I were good enough, they'd still be alive. Thompson said no more. He knew words couldn't strip away that kind of weight overnight. But he knew this. Tonight, he had finally seen Sarah's real wound. Not the one on her skin, but the one in her soul, deeper, harsher, and still unhealed. Sarah wiped her tears, drew a long breath, and whispered like a vow to herself. That's why I stay silent. That's why I choose to disappear into the crowd. If I never step into the light again, then I'll never have to carry another failure. She turned away, leaving Thompson in the dark. But inside him, a different belief was growing. If Sarah could face down this torment, then her skill and her heart could save more lives than any medal ever could. The next morning, the atmosphere in the briefing room was heavy. Plastic chairs lined up in rows, the cold fluorescent lights casting down on weary faces. But everyone knew today would be different. They were all waiting for one name. Rodriguez stood at the front, his voice as calm as ever. First, I want to thank everyone for their effort during last night's ambush. We saved more lives than the report predicted, and that is something we cannot take lightly. A pause. Then his eyes fixed on the back of the room, where Sarah sat, her small frame swallowed among her teammates. But I need to specifically mention Nurse Martinez. What she did out there. He stopped, searching for words. It isn't part of any standard training program. The room stirred. Some nodded in agreement. Others leaned in, waiting for a reaction. Sarah lowered her eyes to the table, her hands clenched white. Rodriguez went on. I've read the report. The incision, the bleeding control, even stabilizing internal organs under battlefield conditions. This is advanced combat surgery knowledge. So, Martinez. His voice slowed, sharp as a blade. Where were you trained? Sarah felt her throat go dry. Every eye locked on her, curious, doubtful, admiring. She wanted to run, to disappear, like always. But this time, there was no escape. Doctor, I only did what I thought had to be done. Her voice was soft, almost vanishing in the air. A young doctor cut in, his tone sharper. That's not just doing. You opened a soldier's abdomen under fire. I've never seen a nurse who could. Enough. Rodriguez raised his hand. His gaze on Sarah carried no anger, only responsibility. Martinez, I'm not here to accuse you. I need the truth so I can assess the resources we have. If you possess skills your file doesn't show, I need to know. Sarah's heart pounded. Images of Afghanistan surged back. The eyes of fallen comrades, the explosion swallowing the sky. Every time she imagined speaking out, her throat locked tight, as if confession itself would drag the nightmare back to life. She drew a deep breath, answering hoarsely, I went through advanced training, but I don't want to say more. A wave of murmurs rose. Some exchanged glances, brows furrowed. Others looked at her with suspicion. If it was real, why hide it? If not, why refuse? From the side row, Thompson's eyes never left her. He saw her shoulders tremble, her hand twitch on her thigh. He knew this wasn't defiance, it was deep fear. The meeting ended unresolved. Rodriguez didn't press further, but his voice dropped, leaving a warning. Martinez, I won't push you today. But remember, in this environment, keeping secrets isn't just dangerous for you, it's dangerous for all of us. Sarah left the room, her steps heavy. Each one felt like treading on hidden mines. Behind her, whispers trailed. Who is she really? Could she have been special forces? Or just making it up? Each word stabbed like a knife in her back. That afternoon, Sarah hid in a quiet wing of the hospital. She sat in a small room, light slanting through the blinds, striping her tired face. Her hand unconsciously touched the scar on her shoulder, a mark from Afghanistan, from that unforgettable night. The door creaked open. Thompson stood at the threshold, silent for a moment before speaking. You can't stay silent forever. The truth will reveal itself. Sarah turned away. Her voice choked. You don't understand. If I say it out loud, I'll have to relive everything. And I don't know if I can survive that. Thompson stepped inside, sitting across from her. I'm not forcing you. But you need to understand. Hiding your skill doesn't make anyone safer. In fact, it puts everyone at risk. I saw you save a life out there. Without you, that sergeant would be dead. Do you want to call that a failure? Sarah's hands clenched tight, silent. In her eyes, fear and guilt tangled together. Outside, the sky darkened. Patrol helicopters thundered overhead, a reminder that war never truly faded. And Sarah knew, the fight outside was only part of it. The greatest battle was inside her, between silence to escape and truth to set her free. That night, the sky was pitch black, without moon or stars. In the duty room, Sarah sat at the desk, head bent over an unfinished report. The space was silent, only the scratch of pen on paper. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. Explosions echoed, followed by a column of smoke rising from the main gate of the base. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed along the hallways. A voice shouted over the loudspeaker. The base is under attack. All medical personnel prepare to receive casualties on site. Sarah froze. Not out on the battlefield, not from afar this time, the very place they sheltered had been breached. Within minutes, the ER was packed with the wounded. The roar of artillery mixed with the thundering of helicopters above. Soldiers poured in with shrapnel wounds, scorched burns, and others on the brink of death. Rodriguez was trapped in the surgical wing, unable to lead. Williams was busy evacuating civilians to the shelters. Everything was chaos. Young medics fumbled, hands trembling, dropping instruments. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, chest tightening. This was the moment she had always feared, being forced out of hiding. A shell landed nearby, shaking the building. Screams rang out. We need someone in charge now. All eyes turned to Sarah. She drew in a deep breath. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then her voice rang out, not shaky, but strong, decisive. Divide into sectors. Group 1, handle bleeding cases. Group 2, secure airways. Group 3, prep the field or move. Everyone hesitated, then followed. Sarah moved from bed to bed, issuing clear orders. This one needs arterial compression now. Insert a chest tube on this patient. Prepare plasma central line infusion. Her hands moved non-stop, her eyes sweeping the room like someone long accustomed to commanding chaos. With every order, the fear in the young nurse's eyes lessened, replaced by focus and discipline. Gunfire erupted right outside the hospital walls. A squad of wounded soldiers was carried in, uniforms drenched in blood. One screamed, "They're closing in! We could lose the perimeter any minute." A young nurse went pale, dropping her bandages. Sarah grabbed her hand firmly, gaze steady. "Look at me. We keep them alive. That's our mission. Don't let fear steal your hands. The girl trembled, then nodded, resuming her work. At that moment, a critical patient flatlined on the table. The attending froze. I've never done this alone. Sarah rushed over, her voice unwavering. Charge paddles. 200 joules. 1, 2, 3. The patient's chest jolted. The monitor beeped back to life. A small cheer burst from the nurses, hope igniting in the dark. Smoke seeped into the room, the acrid stench choking. The glass windows rattled with blasts outside. But Sarah stood firm, commanding without pause. The wounded SEALs stared at her astonished, not just by her skill, but by the authority in her voice. Thompson stood at the door, both guarding and watching Sarah. He had seen her save lives in the field, but this was the first time he saw her lead. No longer timid amid smoke and fire, Sarah looked every bit a true commander. 2 tense hours dragged on like a lifetime. At last, the gunfire outside faded. A report came in. Enemy pushed back. Base gates secure again. Inside the ER, it was as if the oxygen had been sucked out. Exhausted staff slumped to the floor, sweat-soaked and blood-stained. Sarah stood at the center, heart pounding, eyes still blazing. Rodriguez entered, surgical gloves still smeared with blood. He looked around, patients stabilized, young staff working like a well-oiled machine. Then his eyes fixed on Sarah. "You took command?" he asked quietly, voice filled with awe. Sarah bowed her head, ready to deny, but the others didn't let her. A young nurse blurted, "If it weren't for her, we would have lost so many more." Another added, She kept us standing when the whole base shook." The air thickened. Sarah felt every gaze on her, not of suspicion anymore, but affirmation. The secret she fought to bury had been shattered. Her hands clenched, her heart heavy. She didn't want those eyes, the admiration, the trust, because she knew, behind it all was a weight, and that weight had once destroyed an entire family she couldn't save. The night after the attack, the base sank into a strange stillness. Not true peace, but exhaustion after the storm. In the sky, smoke still hung like a scar that hadn't yet closed. Sarah sat alone in the ER, wiping dried blood from the operating table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were empty. Images from the night before kept crashing back. The shaking blasts, the cries of comrades, and her own voice barking orders so strong she barely recognized it. The door swung open. Thompson stepped in. His shirt was still dusty, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but his gaze was bright. He closed the door behind him, shutting everyone else out. "Martinez," he began, voice low and steady. "Enough. You can't hide anymore." Sarah turned her back, pretending to fuss with the instruments on the table. "I don't know what you're talking about." Thompson moved closer, his heavy steps echoing in the room. "Don't do this. I saw you on the battlefield. I saw you take command last night. That wasn't just a nurse. You can fool others, but you can't fool me." Sarah clenched the scalpel in her hand, then set it down softly. A long, deep breath. "If I tell the truth, it won't help. It will only make everything worse." "No," Thompson shot back. "Keeping it hidden is what makes it worse." A heavy silence. Only the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Sarah turned around, her dark eyes bottomless. "You want to hear it? Then listen closely." She stepped forward, closing the space between them to just a few feet. Her voice shook, but each word struck like a hammer on steel. "I used to be a medic officer in the SEALs. I went through training, is reserved for the few. I saved lives that should have been lost. But then one day, I lost everything. My entire team was wiped out in a single night. I was the only one who survived." She stopped, sucking in a shaky breath. "They gave me a medal. But do you know what I see every time I look at it? A curse. Proof that I wasn't good enough to keep them alive." Thompson stayed silent. No argument, no denial. He let her speak. Let the pain pour out of the chest she had locked for too long. That's why I asked to transfer to a regular unit. Here, I can stay quiet, fade away, do the small things no one notices. Here, no one needs me to be Doc Martinez, the name that once carried the lives of a whole team. Here, I'm just Sarah. And for me, that feels safer. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice stayed hard. Now, are you satisfied? You know the truth. Take it and leave me alone. Thompson stepped closer. He looked at her not as a superior, not with admiration but with understanding. Listen to me, he said softly. You didn't fail. You survived something anyone else would have died in. And you're still saving lives. Day after day, hour after hour. If that's failure, then no one in this world deserves to be called a hero. Sarah shook her head, choking up. You don't understand. I carry their deaths with me. Every time I step into the light, I'm afraid I'll bring more death. Thompson placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. You don't bring death, Sarah. You bring life. I've seen it with my own eyes. The people in this base, they're alive because of you. Don't deny that. For a moment, Sarah looked at him, eyes brimming. A clear battle raged inside her, one part clinging to secrecy, the other aching for release. Then, like a flame sparking in the ashes, her voice dropped to a whisper. Then, if I step into the light again, can you promise me one thing? What? Thompson asked. That if I fall again, if I'm not strong enough, you'll be the one to pull me back up. Thompson didn't hesitate. I promise. The room fell silent again, but not the suffocating kind. It was the silence of truth laid bare, of two people knowing from now on, neither was alone. Outside, helicopters thundered through the night. The war wasn't over, and Sarah's secret was no longer hers alone. Thompson carried it with her now, and that, perhaps, would change everything. The next morning, the air in the base felt different. Soldiers passing Sarah gave her slight nods, their eyes no longer filled with mere curiosity or suspicion. It was respect, laced with admiration. But to Sarah, those looks felt like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She avoided contact, burying herself in work, washing instruments, changing bandages, checking supplies. But the silence didn't last long. Martinez. Janet Williams's voice sounded from the doorway. Soft but firm. Dr. Rodriguez wants to see you. Right now. The whole room went still. Sarah let the metal tray slip from her hands, the clash ringing sharp like the final note of her attempt to hide. Rodriguez's office was bare, just a wooden desk, a few folders, and a war map on the wall. He sat behind the desk, light from the window casting shadows across his calm face. When Sarah entered, he gestured to the chair opposite. Sit. She sat stiffly, back straight, hands on her lap, eyes fixed on the floor like a cadet awaiting interrogation. Rodriguez stayed silent long enough for the air to grow heavy. Then his voice came, direct and unflinching. You're not who your file says you are. I've seen it with my own eyes twice before, and again the night of the attack on this base. Your skills are far beyond your rank. So now, Martinez, I want the truth from your own mouth. Sarah swallowed hard. Her heart pounded in her chest. She remembered her promise to Thompson, the eyes of the soldiers she had saved and the faces of those who had fallen in Afghanistan. I was a medic officer with the SEALs, she said softly, as if afraid her own voice might echo too loud. Trained in battlefield surgery, internal trauma, and more. I survived a mission where my entire team was killed. Rodriguez's face didn't change. He simply let her continue, like a doctor listening to a patient reveal their deepest wound. I asked to transfer out of special operations. I didn't want to carry that responsibility anymore. I chose silence, to be just a regular nurse. Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I understand. War leaves scars on all of us. But I have to be honest. Your silence is becoming a problem. He stood and moved to the map on the wall, pointing at the clusters of red marks. We are not in safe times. Casualties rise every day. Complex surgeries are becoming more common. My staff, though dedicated, lack the experience. And you, Martinez, you hold knowledge most of them will never be trained to have. He turned back, locking his gaze on her, leaving no room to look away. I want you to start training them. Share what you know. If you don't, we'll lose more lives. Sarah felt the blow land squarely. She had expected scolding, maybe even punishment, but not this. Rodriguez didn't want to end her path. He wanted to expand it. No, she shot back instantly, almost by reflex. I can't. If they depend on me, if I make a mistake, if I kill them? Rodriguez finished, his voice low and steady. Listen, Sarah, they'll die more if you stay silent. The truth is, you've already saved many lives here. I'm not asking whether you're good enough. I've seen the proof. I'm asking, are you brave enough to share it? Sarah sat frozen, torn apart inside. Her mind dragged her back to that night in Afghanistan. The smoke, the blasts, the lifeless bodies. She closed her eyes, trembling. Rodriguez's tone softened. You don't honor your fallen teammates by hiding. You honor them by saving others, by teaching the next generation what you know. They trusted you to the very end. Don't let that trust die with them. A long silence stretched. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her hands. Hands that had saved lives, but also carried the memory of failure. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Rodriguez didn't push further. He only gave a small nod. Think about it. But soon you'll have to choose. Keep hiding in silence, or step up and turn your pain into strength. He turned back to his desk, signaling the meeting was over. Sarah stood, walking into the hallway, her legs feeling foreign beneath her. Thompson was waiting outside. One look into her eyes told him everything. He knows? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded, voice choked. Not just knows. He wants me to train the others. Thompson laid a steady hand on her shoulder. His eyes were firm. Maybe that's exactly how you stop running. That day, the air in the base was parched, desert sunlight pouring down like fire. In a small room next to the emergency ward, rows of chairs had been neatly arranged. Medical tools laid out on a long table. A whiteboard stood in the corner, scrawled with the words, Advanced Combat Medical Training, Session 1. Sarah stood at the door, her palms drenched in sweat. The familiar feeling from Afghanistan surged back, heart pounding, stomach twisting. But this time it wasn't bombs and gunfire. It was the eyes of the young faces waiting inside. Thompson passed by, glanced at her, and gave a faint smile. Don't think of this as training. Just think you're telling them what you survived to know. Sarah drew a deep breath, then pushed the door open. Inside, about 10 people sat waiting. Nurses, young doctors, even a few field medics. They looked at her with curiosity mixed with expectation. She knew they had heard the rumors about the ambush, about the night the base came under attack. Her throat was dry. She set the kit down on the table, looked around. I'm not an instructor. I don't have a polished lesson plan. But I know one thing. Out there, under fire, sometimes you have 15 seconds to decide who lives and who dies. And what I'm going to share is so you won't waste those 15 seconds. The room fell silent. Sarah began with the basics that meant survival. How to press an artery with precision to stop bleeding. How to secure an airway when there wasn't enough equipment. How to turn crude objects into life-saving tools. On the battlefield, she said, her voice steadier now. No one asks how many years of experience you have. They only need to know. Can you keep them alive for one more minute? If you can, they'll fight for one more minute. And sometimes, one more minute is the difference between life and death for the entire team. She lifted an IV bag, holding it up for everyone to see. Most people think this is just a fluid bag. But if you don't control the drip rate, If you dilute the blood while the patient is bleeding fast, you just killed them. Always remember, more isn't always better. All eyes locked onto her every word. A young doctor raised his hand, voice trembling. But how do you know when you have to operate right there on the spot? We were never taught that. Sarah went quiet for a beat. That question pulled her straight back into the bloody memory of Afghanistan. She saw her own hands trembling as she made her first incision under fire. She drew in a breath, then answered, "When you look at a patient and know they'll be dead if you wait another 10 minutes, there's no formula, only experience, instinct, and courage." The room was dead still. Those young faces suddenly turned solemn, realizing this wasn't theory, but truth paid for in blood. Practice began. Sarah handed out training kits to each of them. She moved around the room, correcting each motion, pointing out small details. When a young nurse fumbled, she didn't scold, just laid a hand on the shoulder and said softly, "Slow down, don't let fear guide your hands. Breathe, then continue." Her words, gentle yet firm, steadied the whole room. The session lasted 3 hours, but it felt like a blink. When it ended, everyone was drenched in sweat, exhausted, yet their eyes burned bright. One young doctor stepped forward, almost blurting out, "If we'd learned this earlier, maybe we could have saved more people." Sarah froze for a moment. The old pain twisted in her chest, but she gave a small nod, answering quietly, "Then make sure from now on, we don't lose anyone just because we lack the knowledge." As everyone left, Thompson still leaned against the door, smiling. "See? You're not just saving lives with your hands, you're saving them by passing on what you know." Sarah looked around the empty room, where the tools still carried the faint smell of alcohol. She felt drained, yet something stirred inside her, a small spark. Not pride, but the sense that she had turned pain into meaning. That night, when Sarah lay down on her bed, sleep didn't come easily. But for the first time in years, her mind wasn't only filled with fallen teammates. She saw young faces full of hope, trembling hands learning to save, and in that moment, she realized maybe this was the only way the wound inside her could begin to heal. That night, as calm returned to the base, Thompson sat on the porch, eyes lifted to a sky full of stars. He knew Sarah would recover. But more than that, he knew what she had left behind, a living legacy, written in blood, in knowledge, and in courage. The smoke of war would eventually clear, but inside that base, something had changed forever. Sarah was no longer the quiet shadow hiding in the hospital corridors. She had become living proof of a truth. Sometimes, the greatest legacy isn't in how many lives you save yourself, but in how much strength you pass on for others to save generations to come. Sarah was still not free from her nightmares. Each night, memories of her fallen SEAL team returned, pounding heavily in her dreams. But now, those memories were no longer just pain, they were fuel, because she had seen that even when she fell, her students stood up steady, brave, unyielding. This story isn't over. That base still lay in the fire zone, and war has never spared those who wear the white coat. But now, Sarah was no longer alone. If you believe the power of knowledge can rise above bombs and bullets, leave a comment. Do you think Sarah will continue to become the leader who trains a new generation? Or will she choose to retreat back into silence? Share your thoughts, and stay tuned for the next chapter of this journey.